The text message glowed on Catherine Montgomery's phone screen, each word cutting deeper than the last. "Darling, you're done. You're too old and washed up. I'm at the bank withdrawing our savings and heading abroad with my young girlfriend." Kate stared at the message, her manicured fingers trembling slightly against the bright screen. But instead of the tears Richard probably expected, a calm smile spread across her lips. If only he knew what was coming. 15 years. That's how long she had shared her life with Richard Montgomery. Nearly 15 years of building a home together, of dinner parties and weekend getaways, of planning for a future that now lay shattered at her feet. Kate set her phone down on the kitchen counter and took a deep breath, her green eyes reflecting determination rather than defeat. She ran her fingers through her wavy brown hair, a habit she'd developed whenever deep in thought. "You called it," she murmured to herself, turning to glance at the manila folder tucked discreetly beside her laptop. Inside was the culmination of 6 months of quiet investigation, photographs, bank statements, and hotel receipts, a paper trail of betrayal that Richard had left in his wake, thinking himself too clever to be caught. Kate had first suspected something was wrong during their anniversary trip to Aspen last December. Richard had been distant, constantly checking his phone with that guilty half-smile that never quite reached his eyes. It was the little things at first, the late nights at the office, the business trips that seemed to multiply, the subtle changes in his wardrobe, and that new cologne he'd never worn for her. "Mrs. Montgomery?" A female voice called from the hallway. "I just got your message. Is everything okay?" Jessica Davis stepped into the kitchen, her professional demeanor at odds with the youthful appearance she had cultivated so carefully over the past 3 months. The young girlfriend Richard thought he was running away with today. "He sent the message," Kate said, showing Jessica her phone. "Just like we anticipated. Right on schedule." Jessica nodded, taking a seat at the kitchen island. "Then he's at First National Bank right now, attempting to withdraw the remaining $12,000. "And what will he find instead?" Kate asked, though she already knew the answer. She just wanted to hear it again, to reassure herself that months of planning hadn't been for nothing. "A balance of exactly $827, Jessica replied with a slight smile. "The minimum required to keep the account open. And when he attempts to use his credit cards, they'll be declined," Kate finished, a strange mix of sadness and satisfaction washing over her. She hadn't wanted things to end this way. Despite everything, she had loved Richard once, deeply. But that love had been buried under years of his deception, his gradual emotional withdrawal, and finally, his blatant infidelity. Kate still remembered the day she'd made the decision to fight back. It had been a Tuesday afternoon, unseasonably warm for March. She'd come home early, fighting a migraine, only to find an unfamiliar earring on the floor beside their bed. An earring that wasn't hers. The physical evidence of what she'd already suspected broke something inside her. Not her heart, but the chains of denial she'd wrapped around herself. Martha had been the one to recommend Jessica. "If you want proof, you need a professional," her friend had said over emergency margaritas that night. "And if what you suspect is true, you need to protect yourself. Financially, emotionally, all of it." The following morning, Kate had met Jessica Davis, private investigator in a coffee shop 3 towns over. Jessica had listened quietly, professionally, as Kate outlined her suspicions. Then she'd made an unexpected suggestion. "What if I become the bait? If your husband is indeed looking for younger women, I could approach him, document everything from the inside." It had been a radical plan, but Kate had agreed. Now, 6 months later, Jessica had gathered irrefutable evidence of Richard's character and intentions, while simultaneously helping Kate protect their assets. "He's going to call you soon," Kate said, checking her watch. "Remember, act surprised when he tells you there's a problem with the money. Suggest the airport Marriott as a meeting place to figure things out." Jessica nodded, picking up her own phone in anticipation. "And you've spoken with the attorney?" Thomas is prepared to serve him the divorce papers tonight. After Richard realizes he's been outplayed. After he learns who you really are. Kate took a deep breath, her wedding ring catching the afternoon light as she drummed her fingers against the counter. The irony wasn't lost on her. For months, Richard had been living a double life, sneaking around behind her back. Now Kate had turned the tables, operating in the shadows, orchestrating a countermove he never saw coming. Part of her wished she could see his face when he realized the woman he'd been planning to escape with, the woman he'd shared his most intimate thoughts and plans with, had been working for his wife all along. "Kate," Jessica said gently, "are you absolutely sure you want to go through with this? There's still time to consider a more conventional approach." Kate looked up at the photograph hanging on the refrigerator. She and Richard on their wedding day, both laughing, his arms wrapped protectively around her waist. They had been so young, so full of dreams. But that was before the lies, before she'd discovered the extent of his betrayal, before she'd realized how thoroughly he'd underestimated her intelligence and resolve. "He made his choice," Kate said quietly, straightening her shoulders. "Now it's time for him to face the consequences." As if on cue, Jessica's phone began to ring. Richard's name flashed on the screen. "Showtime," Jessica whispered, giving Kate a reassuring nod before answering with practiced affection. "Hey, baby, are you on your way? I can't wait to start our new life together." "Something's wrong. Something's very wrong." Richard's voice crackled through Jessica's phone, panic evident in every syllable. Jessica shot Kate a knowing glance, putting the call on speaker so both women could hear. "Calm down, Ricky," Jessica cooed, using the pet name she knew irritated Kate. "What's happening?" "The money, it's gone. Almost all of it." His voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "There's less than $1,000 in the account. The teller says there have been withdrawals over the past few months, but that's impossible. I check the balance on my phone app every week." Kate suppressed a smile. The banking app on Richard's phone had been showing fabricated balances for months. A neat trick Jessica had orchestrated with the help of a tech specialist. Each time Richard had checked, he'd seen exactly what he expected to see. Their life savings, steadily growing, waiting for him to claim when the moment was right. "That can't be," Jessica replied, her voice perfectly calibrated to convey shock and concern. Could Kate have found out somehow? There was a long pause, during which Kate could almost hear the wheels turning in her husband's mind. "No," he finally said. "No way. Kate doesn't have a clue. She's never questioned anything. She still thinks we're celebrating our anniversary next week." The casual dismissal stung more than Kate had expected. 15 years together. And this was what he truly thought of her. Too trusting, too oblivious, too easily deceived. She bit her lip, silently reminding herself that his underestimation had been her greatest advantage. "Listen," Jessica continued, "don't panic. Meet me at the Marriott by the airport, room 412. We'll figure this out together. I'm trying to use the credit cards, but they're all being declined." Richard's voice had risen an octave, the composed businessman facade crumbling rapidly. "Every single one of them." "Just get here," Jessica insisted. "I have some cash. We can sort this out." Seating. After Jessica ended the call, Kate walked to the living room window, looking out at the quiet suburban street where they'd built their life together. Across the road, Mrs. Jenkins was walking her corgi, waving cheerfully at Kate when she noticed her in the window. Kate waved back, wondering what her neighbors would think when they learned the truth about the seemingly perfect Montgomery marriage. "He's completely unraveling," Jessica observed, joining Kate by the window. "Exactly as you predicted." Kate nodded, remembering the night 3 months ago when she'd first accessed Richard's personal email. She'd been shocked, not by the evidence of his affairs. She'd already suspected those, but by his methodical planning to leave her. Email exchanges with overseas banks. Research on countries with no extradition treaties. Inquiries about long-term accommodations in tropical locales. He had been planning his escape for over a year. "I should get to the hotel," Jessica said, checking her watch. Thomas will be waiting in the lobby. Kate turned from the window. You remember everything we discussed? The sequence of events? Jessica nodded, picking up her purse. Richard arrives at the hotel, comes to room 412. We talk, I comfort him, suggest we try to access his investment accounts. While he's distracted, I text Thomas to come up. Thomas knocks, introduces himself as your attorney, and serves the divorce papers. Then I reveal my true identity. And the recording equipment? Already set up in the hotel room, Jessica confirmed, will capture every word, every reaction, especially when he realizes who I really am. As Jessica prepared to leave, Kate's phone chimed with a text from Martha. All set for tonight? Emergency wine and ice cream standing by. Martha had been Kate's rock throughout this ordeal. When Kate had shown her the evidence of Richard's betrayal, Martha had listened without judgment, then helped her strategize. Men like Richard, she'd said, they think they're invincible. They never imagine their wives might be 2 steps ahead. After Jessica left, Kate moved through the house with strange detachment, touching familiar objects that now seemed to belong to someone else's life. The crystal vase Richard had given her for their 10th anniversary. The framed photo from their trip to Greece. The antique writing desk where she'd penned countless love notes to him in the early years. In their bedroom, she opened the closet and ran her fingers across the sleeve of Richard's favorite suit. She'd chosen it for him years ago, guiding him toward styles that complemented his gray eyes and broad shoulders. How proud she'd been to be seen with him, to be chosen by him. The memory of her younger self, so eager to please, so desperate for his approval, made her chest ache with a complex mixture of tenderness and regret. Kate sat on the edge of the bed, remembering countless mornings waking up beside him, his arm draped protectively across her waist. Had it all been a lie? Or had there been real love once, before it withered into something unrecognizable? The buzz of her phone interrupted her thoughts. A text from Jessica. He's on his way. Completely frantic. Tried to make another withdrawal at a different branch. Security was called. Kate took a deep breath, steadying herself for what was to come. She hadn't wanted revenge. Not exactly. What she wanted was justice, and perhaps a reckoning that would force Richard to see her clearly for the first time in years. Not as the compliant wife he'd taken for granted, not as the aging beauty he'd decided to discard, but as Catherine Montgomery, resilient, resourceful, and infinitely more perceptive than he had ever given her credit for. She glanced at her reflection in the bedroom mirror, taking in her green eyes, the soft waves of her brown hair, the yellow blouse she'd chosen that morning. "You're not old and washed up," she whispered to herself, echoing his cruel text. "You're just getting started." The clock on the nightstand read 4:47 p.m. By now, Richard would be approaching the hotel, still believing that his young girlfriend would help him salvage his escape plan. Still unaware that the life he was so eager to abandon had already slipped through his fingers. Kate picked up her phone and texted Thomas. "He's on his way. Are you ready?" The response came immediately. In position. Everything proceeding according to plan. Richard Montgomery paced the perimeter of room 412, his Italian leather shoes wearing an invisible path in the hotel carpet. His usually immaculate appearance had unraveled, tie loosened, salt and pepper hair disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly, a thin sheen of sweat glistening on his forehead, despite the room's aggressive air conditioning. "This doesn't make any sense," he muttered, checking his banking app for the 20th time. The screen still showed the devastating truth. $827.16 remaining in what should have been an account containing their life savings. It has to be some kind of technical error. Kate she wouldn't have. Jessica sat perched on the edge of the king-sized bed, secretly recording every word through the modified watch on her wrist. She'd seen men like Richard before in her line of work, successful, arrogant, believing themselves untouchable until the moment their carefully constructed facades began to crumble. Maybe we should call the bank manager directly, she suggested, maintaining her role as the supportive girlfriend. You said you know him personally, right? Richard nodded distractedly. Jim Colton. He's been our banker for years. I play golf with him at the club. He pulled out his phone again, scrolling through his contacts with trembling fingers. Jessica glanced at her own phone discreetly. Kate had texted, Thomas in position. How is our friend holding up? She typed a quick response. Unraveling beautifully. Making the call now. As Richard pressed the phone to his ear, waiting for his banker to answer, Jessica could see the exact moment when a new, more troubling thought occurred to him. His eyes widened slightly, and he turned away from her, lowering his voice. Jim, it's Rick Montgomery. Listen, I'm having some trouble accessing my funds. Yes, the joint account with Catherine. What? When did she? Are you absolutely certain? Jessica could hear the tinny voice on the other end of the line, though not the specific words. Whatever the banker was saying, it was causing Richard's complexion to pale considerably. But she would have needed authorization. My signature. What do you mean it was all properly documented? Another long pause as he listened, his free hand gripping the back of a chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. I see. And there's nothing you can… Yes, I understand bank policy, Jim. Thanks for nothing. He ended the call abruptly, then stood motionless, staring at the wall. Ricky? Jessica approached him carefully. What did he say? Richard turned to her slowly, his expression shifting from shock to rage. Catherine's been transferring money out for months. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. All perfectly legal, all with proper documentation. He slammed his fist against the desk. Somehow she got my signatures, or forged them. Jessica bit back a satisfied smile, remembering how easy it had been to access Richard's signature from documents in his home office while he showered, blissfully unaware that the woman he believed to be besotted with him was methodically gathering evidence against him. But how would she have known? Jessica asked innocently. You said she had no idea about us. Richard collapsed into the desk chair, loosening his tie further. She couldn't have. Kate's never been suspicious. She trusts me completely. But uncertainty had crept into his voice, and Jessica could see him mentally revisiting moments, searching for clues he might have missed. When did these transfers start? She pressed. According to Jim, the first one was in March. Richard ran his hands through his hair again. Right after our trip to Aspen. Jessica knew exactly what had happened in March. Kate had found evidence of Richard's infidelity, not with Jessica, who hadn't entered the picture yet, but with someone else, an earring beside their bed, the first concrete proof that had shattered Kate's world and spurred her into action. Maybe she found something, Jessica suggested, deliberately planting the seed. A receipt? A text message? Women have intuition about these things. Richard's phone buzzed with an incoming text. He glanced at it, frowning. It's from Kate. Just says she's going out with Martha tonight and not to wait up. He laughed bitterly. She's acting like everything's normal. Like she hasn't just destroyed our financial future. Our financial future, Jessica repeated, emphasizing the possessive pronoun. I thought it was your money with your wife. Richard waved dismissively. You know what I mean. The future I was planning for us. Jessica checked her watch. Thomas would be knocking any minute now. She needed to get Richard talking, to capture as much incriminating evidence as possible before the attorney arrived. Tell me again about the plan, she urged, sitting beside him and placing a hand on his knee. After we get some money, where were we going to go? His expression softened slightly as he looked at her, still believing in the fantasy he'd constructed. Bali, at first. I have a contact there. Someone who can help us establish new identities if necessary. Then maybe Singapore or Thailand, somewhere Kate would never think to look. And your business? Your clients? I've been transferring my most valuable clients to offshore accounts for months, he admitted, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Kate has no idea how much money I've actually been making. The joint accounts she's emptied? That's just the tip of the iceberg. Jessica nodded encouragingly, her recording device capturing every damning word. You're so clever, Ricky. You've thought of everything. His smile returned, ego temporarily soothed by her admiration. That's why we're perfect together, Jess. You understand ambition. Kate, she was content with mediocrity. She never pushed herself, never strived for more. He took Jessica's hand. You're everything she's not. Young, exciting, hungry for life. The cruel assessment of his wife, a woman who had supported his career for 15 years, who had helped build the very success he was now weaponizing against her, made Jessica's stomach turn. But she maintained her adoring expression, knowing they were close to the moment of revelation. A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Richard frowned. Are you expecting someone? No, Jessica said, feigning confusion. Maybe it's hotel staff? When Richard opened the door, he found himself face to face with a tall, distinguished man in an expensive suit. Richard Montgomery? The man asked formally. Yes? Who are you? Thomas Green, attorney at law. I represent your wife, Catherine Montgomery. He extended a large manila envelope. You've been served with divorce papers. I suggest you read them carefully. Richard stood frozen, envelope in hand, as Thomas stepped past him into the room. The attorney nodded almost imperceptibly to Jessica, who immediately stood up. Mr. Montgomery, Thomas continued, I believe you're already acquainted with Ms. Jessica Davis, the private investigator your wife hired 6 months ago to document your affairs and financial misconduct. Richard's head snapped toward Jessica, disbelief and betrayal washing over his features. Private investigator? What the hell is this? Jessica pulled out a professional identification card from her purse. Jessica Davis, licensed private investigator. I've been working for your wife since March. Everything you've said and done in my presence has been documented and will be submitted as evidence in your divorce proceedings. Richard's face contorted with rage. You were working for Kate all this time? Our relationship was a setup? There was never a relationship, Mr. Montgomery. Jessica corrected him coolly. There was an investigation, and you made it remarkably easy by being exactly the unfaithful, greedy man your wife suspected you were. The color drained from Richard's face as the full implications of Jessica's words sank in. He staggered backward, collapsing onto the edge of the bed, the divorce papers still clutched in his trembling hand. This can't be happening, he whispered, his voice barely audible. You and I, we had something real. Jessica maintained her professional demeanor, though inwardly she felt a flicker of pity for this man whose entire world was imploding around him. What we had, Mr. Montgomery, was a carefully orchestrated investigation. Every dinner, every weekend getaway, every intimate conversation, all documented and catalogued as evidence. Thomas cleared his throat, drawing Richard's attention back to the legal matters at hand. Mrs. Montgomery has filed for divorce on grounds of adultery and financial misconduct. The papers include a detailed accounting of your attempts to hide assets and your plans to abandon the marriage with ill-gotten funds. Richard's shock quickly morphed into indignation. She can't prove any of that. It's her word against mine. Actually, Jessica interjected, holding up her watch, it's your word against your own. We have hours of recordings in which you detail your plans to leave the country with misappropriated funds, not to mention documentation of multiple affairs prior to my involvement. That's entrapment, Richard exploded, jumping to his feet. You manipulated me. You seduced me to get information. Jessica remained perfectly calm. I never initiated any romantic or physical contact, Mr. Montgomery. Every advance came from you, despite your marriage vows. And every conversation about financial misconduct was volunteered by you. Unprompted. Thomas nodded, adding, the courts tend to take a rather dim view of husbands who plot to clean out joint accounts before abandoning their wives, particularly when they've been systematically hiding income in offshore accounts for years. Richard's expression shifted again. this time to calculation. Jessica had seen this look before, the moment when a cornered man starts searching for leverage, for any advantage he could use to regain control of the situation. "Where is she?" he demanded. "I want to talk to Kate directly. This is between us. We can work this out without lawyers." "Mrs. Montgomery has no interest in speaking with you at this time," Thomas replied smoothly. "All communication will go through me moving forward." Richard tore open the envelope and scanned the first page of the divorce petition, his face darkening as he read. "She wants the house, my car, half of my business." He looked up, eyes blazing. "She's out of her mind. I built that business from nothing. She was just a housewife." Jessica couldn't contain herself. "A housewife who put you through business school, who entertained your clients, who managed your household while you were working late, who believed in you when no one else would." Thomas shot her a warning glance. Professionally, she needed to remain neutral, but Jessica felt no regret for the outburst. She had grown genuinely fond of Kate over the months they'd worked together. Richard seemed not to have heard her. He was frantically flipping through the papers, his agitation growing with each page. "These financial disclosures. How did she get access to my offshore accounts? That's not possible. You should be more careful about leaving your laptop unlocked when you shower, Ricky," Jessica said quietly, "and about using the same password for multiple accounts. Catherine paid quite a premium for my technical expertise." A look of horrified understanding dawned on Richard's face. "The money? My private accounts? You helped her access those too?" Jessica smiled thinly. "Let's just say the funds you thought would finance your new life abroad have been legitimately reclaimed by their rightful co-owner. And yes, a significant portion was used to pay for my services." "You can't do this!" Richard lunged toward Jessica, but Thomas stepped between them. "That would be a very poor decision, Mr. Montgomery," the attorney warned. "Assaulting Mrs. Montgomery's investigator would only strengthen her case and potentially result in criminal charges against you." Richard backed away, his breathing ragged. He looked wildly around the hotel room, the room he'd booked for his escape, now transformed into the site of his undoing. "This isn't over," he threatened, though his voice lacked conviction. "Kate doesn't understand what she's up against. I have connections, resources." "Not anymore," Thomas interrupted calmly. "Your joint accounts have been legally divided. Your credit cards have been canceled. And as for your connections, many of them have already been contacted with evidence of your fraudulent business practices." Richard's phone rang, cutting through the tension. He glanced at the screen, then answered with forced composure. "Marcus, now's not a good time." His face fell as he listened. "What do you mean? Resigning from the account? We've worked together for 5 years." Another pause. "Who contacted you? Catherine? She has no right to—" He stopped, listening again. "Evidence of what exactly?" Jessica and Thomas exchanged knowing glances as Richard's last support system began to crumble. Kate had been thorough in her preparations, contacting Richard's key business associates with carefully selected evidence of his ethical breaches, not enough to trigger legal action, but sufficient to make them distance themselves professionally. "I need to think," Richard muttered, after ending the call. He sank into the desk chair, suddenly looking older than his 42 years. The confident, charming businessman had vanished, replaced by a cornered man facing the consequences of his actions. Thomas checked his watch. "I have another appointment. Mrs. Montgomery has arranged for your personal items to be packed and delivered to your brother's address, as specified in the temporary orders included in these papers." He placed his business card on the desk. "I suggest you retain counsel immediately. The hearing is scheduled for next week." As Thomas prepared to leave, Richard looked up, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. "She won't go through with this. Kate doesn't have the spine for a court battle. She'll settle quietly once she's had her little revenge fantasy." Jessica couldn't help but laugh. "You still don't get it, do you? After 15 years of marriage, you never really knew your wife at all. Catherine Montgomery is one of the strongest, most methodical women I've ever met. She spent 6 months building this case, while maintaining a perfect facade of normalcy. She outmaneuvered you at every turn, while you thought she was oblivious. You underestimated her, Mr. Montgomery, Thomas added. A mistake your next wife would be wise to avoid. After Thomas departed, Jessica gathered her belongings, preparing to leave Richard alone with the wreckage of his plans. At the door, she paused, turning back to deliver one final message. "Catherine wanted me to tell you something," she said. "Those text messages you sent this morning, about her being old and washed up, she said to tell you that yes, the money was indeed spent on your young girlfriend, me. Every dinner you paid for, every hotel room you booked, every gift you gave me, all came back to her in the form of evidence that will ensure she gets everything in the divorce." Richard stared at her, speechless. "Oh, and one more thing," Jessica added. "The private investigator you hired 2 years ago to get dirt on Catherine for a potential divorce? He was a colleague of mine. He found nothing because there was nothing to find. Unlike you, Catherine honored her vows." With that parting shot, she closed the door behind her. In the hotel corridor, Jessica sent a text to Kate. "It's done. He's been served. Complete meltdown, just as you predicted." Kate's response came seconds later. "Thank you for everything. Coming over to Martha's now. Wine is already open." Jessica smiled, picturing the Montgomery home, a house Richard had assumed would be empty tonight, believing Kate was none the wiser about his plans to abandon their marriage. Instead, Kate was taking the first steps toward reclaiming her life, surrounded by friends who had supported her throughout this ordeal. As Jessica walked toward the elevator, her phone buzzed with a follow-up message from Kate. "Is it wrong that I wish I could have seen his face?" "Not wrong at all," Jessica typed back. "I recorded everything. Movie night at Martha's?" 6 months later, Catherine Montgomery stood in the kitchen of her home, legally declared solely hers in the divorce settlement, arranging fresh-cut flowers in a crystal vase. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the golden highlights in her brown hair, now styled in a shorter, more modern cut that framed her face perfectly. She wore a bright yellow blouse that brought out the green in her eyes, a deliberate choice for today's occasion. The doorbell rang, and Kate took a deep breath before answering. Martha stood on the porch, arms laden with a bottle of champagne and a small gift bag. "Is it ridiculous that I'm nervous?" Kate asked, ushering her friend inside. "It's just the final paperwork." Martha set the champagne on the counter and embraced Kate warmly. "Not ridiculous at all. It's the official end of a 15-year chapter of your life. That's significant, no matter how ready you are to move forward." Kate nodded, grateful for Martha's understanding. In the months since serving Richard with divorce papers, she had experienced a roller coaster of emotions. Vindication and triumph, intermingled with moments of grief for the marriage she had once believed in. There had been ugly court appearances, where Richard's attorney had attempted to paint her as vindictive and manipulative. There had been late-night doubts when she questioned whether her elaborate plan for justice had been worth the emotional toll. But through it all, Kate had held firm, supported by Martha, Jessica, and the undeniable evidence of Richard's betrayal. "Thomas called this morning," Kate said, arranging cheese and crackers on a serving plate. "The judge denied Richard's final appeal. The settlement stands exactly as originally determined." "Of course it does," Martha replied, popping the champagne cork with a satisfying thunk. "Richard didn't have a legal leg to stand on, and his reputation in the legal community is shot. No respectable attorney wants to be associated with his case anymore." The aftermath of Richard's exposure had been swift and comprehensive. Once his business associates learned of his plans to abscond with company funds, they had distanced themselves immediately. His carefully cultivated professional image had crumbled, revealing the unethical practices that had lurked beneath the charming facade all along. "Have you heard anything about where he is now?" Martha asked carefully, filling 2 champagne flutes. Kate shook her head. "Thomas mentioned something about him taking a position with a small firm in Nevada. Apparently, It's the only offer he could get, after everything came to light. She paused, surprised by the lack of satisfaction this knowledge brought her. Honestly, I don't really care anymore. That part of my life is over. The doorbell rang again, and Kate smiled as she went to answer it. Jessica stood on the porch, elegant in a tailored pantsuit, her investigator's badge nowhere in sight today. "I brought the documents," Jessica said, holding up a large envelope as she stepped inside. "And also this." She revealed a second bottle of champagne from behind her back. "I thought we might need reinforcements." Howdy. The three women gathered in the living room, the same space where Kate had first revealed her suspicions to Martha, where Jessica had outlined her unconventional plan to pose as Richard's mistress. Now it was transformed. New furniture, new paint colors, new energy. Kate had systematically removed every trace of Richard from the home, replacing each item with something that reflected her own tastes and preferences. "Before we get to the paperwork," Jessica said, setting her champagne flute on a coaster, "I have some news you might find interesting." Kate raised an eyebrow. "Professional or personal?" "A bit of both." Jessica smiled. "Remember Richard's business associate in Bali? The one who was supposedly going to help with new identities?" Kate nodded. During the investigation, they had uncovered communications between Richard and a somewhat shady international contact. Well, it turns out he was running a sophisticated scam targeting wealthy Americans looking to disappear with their money. Richard would have arrived in Bali to find his remaining funds mysteriously transferred out of his accounts, with no real help forthcoming. Martha burst out laughing. "So, even if we hadn't caught him, he would have ended up penniless in Bali anyway?" "Poetic justice," Kate murmured, a smile playing at her lips. "He always thought he was the smartest person in any room." That's been his downfall in every aspect," Jessica agreed. "He underestimated you. He underestimated his business partner's ethics, and he would have underestimated that scammer too." Kate shook her head, thinking about the man she had once loved so deeply. "It's strange. When I first found that earring beside our bed, I was devastated. I thought my world was ending. But now, I'm grateful." "Grateful?" Martha asked, surprised. "If I hadn't found it, I might have continued living in blissful ignorance for years. Or worse, he might have succeeded in his plan to leave me penniless." Kate sipped her champagne thoughtfully. "That moment of discovery was painful, but it woke me up. It forced me to see Richard for who he truly was, not who I wanted him to be." Jessica raised her glass. "To painful awakenings that lead to new beginnings." They clinked glasses, and Kate felt a swell of gratitude for these women who had stood by her through the darkest period of her life. "Now," Jessica said, placing the envelope on the coffee table, "these are the final transfer documents for the offshore accounts. Once you sign, the last of Richard's hidden assets will be legally yours, as per the court order." Kate picked up the pen, hesitating for just a moment. "You know, when this all started, part of me wanted revenge. I wanted Richard to suffer like I had suffered." She tapped the pen against the papers. But somewhere along the way, that changed. This stopped being about hurting him and became about reclaiming my dignity, my security, my future. "That's why you won," Martha said softly. "The courts saw a woman protecting herself, not a wife out for vengeance." Kate signed the documents with a steady hand, then sat back, exhaling slowly. "It's really over." "Not over," Jessica corrected her, raising her glass again. "Just beginning to new chapters." Later that evening, after Martha and Jessica had gone, Kate stood on her back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. She held a red mug filled with tea, steam curling upward in the cool evening air. Her phone chimed with a text message from Thomas. "Congratulations. Final paperwork filed with the court. Officially done." Kate smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. The text Richard had sent her that fateful day still lingered in her memory. "Darling, you're done. You're too old and washed up." At 40, She had believed those cruel words might be true. Now, at 41, she understood just how wrong he had been. She wasn't done. She was just getting started. The following week, Kate would finalize the purchase of a small marketing consultancy, a business venture she had dreamed of for years but had set aside to support Richard's career. She had already hired Jessica's sister as her office manager and was in talks with several promising clients. Her life, once defined by her role as Richard Montgomery's wife, was now taking shape according to her own vision. As darkness fell, Kate went inside and picked up the framed photo on her mantel, not of her wedding day, but of herself, Martha, and Jessica, taken 3 months ago on a weekend trip to the coast. 3 women with genuine smiles, celebrating friendship and new beginnings. She ran her fingers over the silver frame, remembering the day Richard's cruel text had arrived. How devastated she had felt, then how determined. How she had transformed her pain into purpose, her betrayal into strength. "Yes, Richard," she whispered to the empty room, "I already was, but not in the way you meant." Kate placed the photo back on the mantel and moved through her house, turning off lights, straightening cushions, embracing the peaceful solitude that no longer felt like loneliness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new joys. She was ready for all of it. The cruel text that had been meant to destroy her had instead become the catalyst for her rebirth. Richard had intended it as a final dismissal, never imagining that Kate would not only survive his betrayal, but emerge stronger, wiser, and more fulfilled than before. As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, Kate smiled at the irony. Richard's message had been right about one thing. The woman he had married was indeed done. Done with self-doubt, done with betrayal, done with living in someone else's shadow. In her place stood Catherine Montgomery, finally and gloriously herself. If you enjoyed this story, please hit like and subscribe to the channel. And comment below, what city are you watching from? If you'd like to support me on Buy Me a Coffee, just check the pinned comment. Thanks for the coffee, and see you in the next story.